James Gunn was recently on the Inside of You podcast with Michael Rosenbaum, I think was his name. And he was just having first of all, I highly recommend this podcast, Inside of You, listening to the James Gunn conversation. It was a amazing interview. Very real, very raw. James Gunn gave a lot of tidbits about the DCU. There was a lot that he talked about comic book wise and movie wise and just like his career in general. I thought it was great. I loved it, and it just made me a bigger fan of James Gunn. The guy was so real. He was so honest. It was great to hear. Really, really, really good interview. But one of the things that James Gunn said during this interview about the DCU involved Blue Beetle, the upcoming Blue Beetle that's coming out in August. And usually I pull quotes, but I wanted to watch this with you guys. So I got a clip for you right here. So let's listen to James Gunn talk about Blue Beetle and the future of the DCU.
You've worked on Marvel and DC films. How do the two universes differ in terms of tone, style, and approach to storytelling? And what are some of the challenges and opportunities that come with working in each?
I don't think that there's any, I don't think you can, because relatively, the MCU and now the DCU in film, which really doesn't start. I mean, the first DCU character for sure is Blue Beetle, and the first full DCU movie is Superman. So I don't know if there's any innate things about tone, because I think that what both MCU and DCU need to do is to have a wider range of tones than they presently do. But if you look at the MCU, there are very few superheroes. There are very few traditional superheroes. There was never a guy with a secret identity until Spider-Man in the MCU. Their Cap was turned into a soldier, even though he wears a mask.
And that's all there was in DC.
Iron Man outed himself at the end of the first Iron Man because they don't want to deal with the secret identity stuff. So there is a bit more of a fantasy element to DCU. For me, there's Superman and Clark Kent, like they're two different characters, and you have to find a way to deal with them that's as grounded as possible within this world of DC. One of the things I love about DC and excites me about DC is that, in a way, it's another alternate history. It is Gotham City and Metropolis and Star City and Bloodhaven and all these different places in this other reality, and it makes it a little bit like Westeros in some ways. I love that about it. I love that we get to create true world building in DC. It isn't just we're throwing some superheroes on Earth.
Yeah. I like that.
So I think that right now that's one of the key differences.
So yeah, great interview. I highly recommend checking it out. But he talked about the DCU a lot more than that. He also went on to say things like after Superman Legacy, as soon as he's done with that movie, he's going on to do Peacemaker Season 2. So a lot of questions were there about where's Peacemaker Season 2? When's that going to happen? He still confirmed that Waller comes before Peacemaker Season 2. But yeah, I guess we'll get Peacemaker Season 2 the tail end of 2025, maybe 2026. But what I really wanted to focus on with those clip that I pulled and did a little bit of editing to is what he said about Blue Beetle and what he said about his DCU. So let's start with Blue Beetle, because in this clip, James Gunn confirms that Blue Beetle is for sure the first character in the DCU, but he's not the first movie. That goes to Superman Legacy. This is a very interesting quote. This is a very interesting way to frame this, to phrase this, because he doesn't say things like, Peacemaker is the first character of the DCU, or The Flash is the first character of the DCU. He specifically says Blue Beetle is for sure the first character. So this tells me right away, Blue Beetle, he's coming over. They must have a lot of faith in this movie. Blue Beetle was supposed to just go to HBO Max. It was supposed to just be a free-to-TV kind of movie, and they decided to put it in theaters. I guess it turned out really well. James Gunn was really happy with it, that he's going to bring this character into the DCU. Now, it's interesting that he says it's the first character, but not the first movie, because you would think that, hey, if it's the first character and we need to know this character in order to get into the DCU, we kind of have to watch his movie, don't we? Now, there is a couple things that he could be referring to when saying this. One of the things he could be saying that, anyways, interpretation-wise, that I think, is he's saying, yes, we're going to take Blue Beetle into the DCU. I guess he'll be played by the same actor, Zolo from Cobra Kai, I assume. We're bringing over Blue Beetle. We're taking him, but everything that happens in his movie, or just his movie in general, doesn't affect the DCU. So we'll have the same actor, we'll have the same character, but what happened in his movie, we won't address. It's not canon to my movie and my universe. So there's that way of looking at it. Another way to kind of look at it from James Gunn's perspective is the fact that he didn't make Blue Beetle. In fact, this whole era of Warner Brothers and DC didn't make Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle was made by the old regime of Warner Brothers. Therefore, it's not really their movie. Same with like Shazam! Fear of the Gods and Aquaman and even The Flash. Those were not movies made under James Gunn's leadership at DC. Before DC was even a studio, those movies were made before all that. So he could also be looking at it as like, this movie is not part of the DCU because it was made before the DCU, but we're still going to connect it in some ways with Blue Beetle, with bringing him over, which would still, in my mind, make Blue Beetle the first movie of the DCU. It's a very interesting way of phrasing it. I don't fully understand. It brings up more questions than answers in some ways. I'm sure we'll get some more answers in less than 24 hours for you guys. For some of you guys, for me, it's like less than 48 hours. Very curious to see what The Flash does and how it's going to connect to DCU. One of the other things that he talks about in this clip is how his DCU is going to look. Now, I've seen some people online on Twitter saying James Gunn took shots at Marvel, at the MCU, when he talks about like, oh, you're just throwing characters on Earth. We're not going to do that. We want more variety and stuff like that. I think there might be a little bit of that in there. I don't know if I would call them shots at Marvel. Just like he sees the problems as he's now running DC himself. He looks at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's looking at his competitor. What are they doing? What's working? What's not working? And what can we do? And he's noticing what the audience is responding to. But I like that his vision of the world of DCU is going to have masked superheroes, because as much as I love the MCU and as much as I do love the familiarity of these characters being on a world that resembles ours, it feels very grounded, and the superheroes, they don't really worry about the masks and hiding their identities, and they can just go out and be like celebrities basically. I have enjoyed that about the MCU, but I'm not going to lie when I say that in this interview, when James Gunn says we're missing the vigilante that masks up and hides his identity, and Clark Kent and Superman, I see them as two different people. They're going to be played as two different people. That gets me excited. I kind of miss that era of superheroes, of comic book movies. I like, especially in like the Christopher Reeve Superman, how he had to put on a persona of Clark Kent to make people less suspicious of him being Superman, and when he's Superman, he acts a different way. I've enjoyed that. I miss that. I like that James Gunn is going to bring that into his DCU, and I also like that he mentions like DCU is kind of going to be a fantasy world. It's not going to feel like our world exactly. It's gonna have made up cities. It's gonna have made up places, just like the comics do. I like that he's keeping that approach. He's sticking to those roots, and it's also a great way. It's very smart as well to differentiate themselves from the MCU. Because if they just put Batman, I don't know, you'd get so much backlash. But if they just put Batman in like New York City, or they put Superman in New York City, and they tried to do the Marvel Cinematic Universe thing where they put him in real locations, not that they can't do that all the time, but you would get comparison between the MCU and the DCU. So the fact that he's laid out his universe, he's building out his world in this way, I'm very excited for. And I just, this interview made me more confident in James Gunn's vision for the DCU, and it made me more curious. It made me more not skeptical, but just kind of confused in some ways, but also really, really excited for what James Gunn is going to be doing with this DCU. What do you guys think of these comics? What did you guys think of what James Gunn had to say about Blue Beetle being the first character, but not the first movie? Does that make sense to you? Comment down below. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions about this, guys.